And what we saw in August was the biggest drop in the pound since the Brexit referendum over the course of the full month. So, yes, all currencies are having a horrible time. The euro is falling really hard. The yen.
We're struggling against the euro as well, though, aren't we?
We are struggling somewhat against the euro as well, yes. So there is something that is particular about the UK that investors really don't like.
Do we know what?
I mean, take your pick. There's a number of things. Investment coming into the UK has been slow since 2016, since the Brexit referendum. And it's notable that sterling is having a horrible time, even despite the fact that the Bank of England started raising interest rates before a lot of other central banks. And generally that is supportive for currencies. So there's politics which don't help. We are seeing, Liz Truss has been talking about potentially altering the Bank of England's mandate in some way, and that introduces a little bit more scope for uncertainty and for investors to get the heebie-jeebies.
Why is the dollar thriving?
Well, because the US is much more sheltered from the energy shock that we're seeing in Europe and the UK. And the central bank in the US, the Federal Reserve, has been extremely clear that they will not stop until they kill this inflation problem, and that they are going to raise interest rates extremely aggressively until we get to that point. It's a bit difficult for central banks in the European time zone to send out an equally strong message when we've got this horrible energy price shock.
And what should we be looking out for next?
We should probably be keeping an eye. I know you've asked me to hold your hand through the currency markets, but try and keep a bit of an eye on the bond markets as well, because bond markets in the UK, government bonds have been falling quite swiftly, more swiftly again than in other countries. And that's because investors are a little bit worried that whoever we get as the new Prime Minister on Monday, and I think we all have a reasonable idea who that will be tempted to throw money at the problems we've got in the UK economy. I'm not saying I have a better idea of what to do at this point, but I am saying that large amounts of fiscal spending are generally inflationary and are generally bad for currencies.
Katie Martin, thank you. I understood every single word of that, which is a credit to your clarity and your communication skills. Many thanks indeed. 37 minutes after 11, keeping an eye on that. Morgan Stanley describing Britain as facing a challenging economic situation. Let's put one more there. One more, I think, and then I'm going to do the list, and then we'll start on what's the worst. Because my list probably isn't full. Actually, anything that I haven't mentioned, I'm going to run very quickly through my list, right? And then 11:37, then we'll try and clear a couple of phone lines if we can, unless there's new stuff on there. Stuff that's not on my list already. And I've added some things that haven't been brought up by callers yet, because, it's my party and I'll cry if I want to, because I want to get stuff. So so the care homes just coming in via text and tweet, and I'm sorry I can't credit people who are doing so. Moving people from hospitals with COVID into care homes and essentially killing countless pensioners, countless poor old people. So let's start. Okay, shaking hands with COVID patients, boasting about shaking hands with COVID patients. The big picture stuff, the complete breakdown in trust and integrity or faith in authority and expertise. The fear, the size of his majority, providing a terrifying insight into the fact that it could happen here. Put those middle two in brackets, actually, because they're quite abstract. So focusing on concrete things that you take away from Boris Johnson's premiership. The shaking of hands with COVID patients at a time when the entire country needed to be made aware of the dangers of any form of contact with infected people. The dismissal of the report that found Priti Patel had been a bullying that cost £370,000 in compensation, and the subsequent resignation of the independent advisor on ministerial standards in protest and disgust at the Prime Minister's refusal to impose ministerial standards. The deployment of a disgusting, completely dishonest slur involving Jimmy Savile in the actual House of Commons, plucked from the sewers of far-right social media and dropped smack in the middle of the House of Commons. The either the promotion of the son of a former KGB spy into the House of Lords or the partying with the former KGB spy himself, unaccompanied and unchecked in an Italian palazzo. The promise to lie down in front of the bulldozers before a new runway at Heathrow could be built, followed by flying out of the country on concocted business on the day that the bulldozers actually moved in to start the new runway at Heathrow. The attempts to save Owen Paterson after he was found to have breached the parliamentary standards. The attempt, led by Jacob Rees-Mogg, to tear up the rule book on how parliamentarians must behave as a direct consequence of one of their cronies falling foul of it. Did you know, the more we talk, the more that one comes back again and again as a really emblematic episode. The parties, I mean, is it 123 members of Downing Street staff issued with fines? And I suspect it would have been a lot more if they'd started investigating earlier. The unlawful proroguing of Parliament, brought about, of course, by the misleading of the Queen. Jacob Rees-Mogg, once again, absolutely at the heart of that one. The lies about the Northern Ireland border in the Irish Sea, that there'd be no border in the Irish Sea, a blatant lie, disproved within minutes of Brexit beginning. The dogs from Afghanistan, a few of you are texting about that, taking out animals, using government influence to help animals be evacuated when humans were being left behind. The pledge to break international law in a very limited and specific way. The threat to the Good Friday Agreement that the whole of Brexit brings about. The existence of David Frost and his ludicrous deal, which he's now spending the rest of his career trying to disown. He, of course, gets elevated to the House of Lords. The people that he's put in the House of Lords, utterly undeserving characters like Zach Goldsmith, Lord for losing elections. The Claire Fox character, Daniel Moylan, Daniel Hannan, the most undeserved. I mean, almost make an argument for bringing back hereditary peers in the House of Lords if the ones appointed by government are going to be so objectively and demonstrably useless. The school dinners with Marcus Rashford, the appalling U-turn on that. The description of historical investigations into historical child sex abusers spaffing money up the wall. The missing of 5 Cobra meetings at the very beginning of coronavirus, and the essential introduction to the most vulnerable buildings in the country of people infected with coronavirus. I speak, of course, of the protective ring that they threw around the care homes. I think there's more. I'm not starting yet on the question of what's the worst. I want more. What else have we got? What have we missed off the list? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's only been 3 years. There's no excuses for forgetting. What's not on my list of Boris Johnson's legacy? And of course, I should stress, you're more than welcome to ring in and put some stuff on the credit column. What are the positives? But you can't just say words without telling me what they mean. So if you were going to say, got Brexit done, you'd have to point out all the benefits and why that's a good thing. Because it's like saying, set fire to my house, as if that was something I should congratulate you for and celebrate. And you obviously can't say vaccine rollout, because a brief and temporary head start on something that the rest of the world subsequently caught up with and emulated doesn't count as a reason to credit or praise somebody. And of course we should put Kate Bingham on the list. Not Kate Bingham, the other one, Dido Harding, and her test and trace. What was it, £37 billion on that? Some of it worked, I think, but the vast majority of it clearly didn't. Andrew's in Runcorn. Andrew, what shall I put on my list?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Andrew.
The appalling U-turn on banning conversion therapy in the UK.
Remind me of that one. It's
people who believe it's the gay cure. They believe LGBT people can be converted from their sexuality. And there was a commitment by David Cameron and Theresa May. There was a government consultation exercise, and he in June did a complete U-turn on the government's commitment to ban, the disgusting practice of conversion therapy in the UK.
I suspect you're more across this issue than I was. I don't quite remember it like that. Are you sure they banned it? No, they've reversed the ban. They were going to ban.
Yeah, there's a proposal to ban it.
No, they have banned it. They have because Liz Truss got asked last week about it, and she said she wouldn't reverse it.
No, it's not. Yeah, it's not banned, James.
Asked directly whether the Foreign Secretary would keep the government's ban on anti-gay conversion therapy in her legislative agenda should she become Prime Minister in September. An official legislative agenda. So
yeah, so it's still able to be practiced in the UK. And I do believe, I'm not a Tory, but I do genuinely believe that David Cameron and Theresa May wanted to ban
it. And Johnson did it. So it was on the. So it remains. The former Tory leader Ian Duncan Smith had described plans to ban the practice as ghastly woke culture, while standing in for Truss and ever. So it is still a plan to ban it, and you think that Johnson sort of stepped back from doing so, as it were.
Well, after it was immediately he stepped back from it after his confidence vote in June. So
he was throwing red meat to people.
Throwing
red meat to people like Ian Duncan Smith.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I believe he's done. So
good Lord.
Yeah. So there you are. So there's another one for your list.
No, it is. I mean, crikey, there's literally no depth unplumbed, is there? 11:45 is the time. I'll take this up to 12. So if you need to get something on my list, you need to hurry up. Then we'll run through them all at the top of the hour, and we'll start discussing or even perhaps voting on what is the single worst thing or best thing. At the moment, I've got nothing on that list that Boris Johnson did as Prime Minister. 11:48 is the time. Jonathan tweets, it's such a long list of contenders, James. I think you should have 12 hustings to argue them out over the next couple of months before announcing the winner from a vote of an unknown number of people. Referring to our long list of Boris Johnson's greatest hits, but there are still some things missing. For example, the wallpaper story. Barnard Castle's not there yet, and I've got that Dido Harding. Kath's in Brighton. Kath, what's missing?
Well, kind of chucking out all the big beasts who had disagreed with him in 2019, so there wasn't alternative talent in there.
That was quite a big alarm bell, wasn't it?
Oh, God, yeah.
And because it was the first thing in many ways that we perhaps forget the importance of it, but essentially silencing, and not even silencing, ejecting criticism from the governing party has a pretty ugly history.
Yeah, and it's by getting rid of the criticism, you've got fewer checks on him when he was doing all the other nasty, silly stuff.
Yes, yeah, you're absolutely right. With a majority that size, the opposition can't do much. So the importance of having backbench MPs in your own party who will speak truth to power becomes absolutely immense. And there weren't any. There weren't any left. Wow. The worst of all, do you think?
Oh, there's so many, but you hadn't mentioned that one.
No, so, but in terms of from everything else follows in a way. You know, if you'd had your David Gawkes in there, or your Rory Stewarts, or the ones that would actually have prioritised principle, Anna Soubry, prioritising principle over personal advancement or personal ambition, then possibly some of the worst things that we've been listing all morning may have been averted. You're on the list, Kath. The cull of the dissenters, I would call it, because I love a poetic turn of phrase. 10 to 12 is the time. She'll be talking to Rory Stewart next week, actually, about his new job, which is very interesting. And a lot of people often sort of say, well, what would you do differently, or why aren't you doing anything? Well, personally, because I'm a journalist, not a politician, but some people who have been or want to be politicians, like David Miliband, going off and working for a massive international charity, trying still to make a difference, trying still to do something. Rory Stewart's new job, very much in that category. Time now for what's becoming a relatively regular feature. Paul Caruana Galizia, an editor and reporter over at Tortoise, the slow news website, has been hard at work once again, not on this occasion with regard to Evgeny Lebedev or any of the Russian connections to Boris Johnson, looking instead at a very British supporter of Boris Johnson. I speak of Peter Cruddas, another Conservative donor to get a seat in the House of Lords, although I think there was some shenanigans about that as well at the very beginning. Why wouldn't you put him in the House of Lords? He's given the Tory party £3 million. And it's an odd story, this, Paul, if you don't mind me saying so, because I can't quite understand why he agreed to sit down with you for so long.
It is quite amazing, and the interview ran for about 2.5 hours, and then he's got very strong political views on Brexit, on immigration, but the one thing about him is he's sort of disarmingly frank. He's very open about look, this is just the way political party, or in particular the Conservative Party, raises money. Everyone knows it works in this way. He'll tell you, and that he feels unfairly singled out for it. But as an interviewee, kind of great because he just spoke very openly about that world.
For people who don't know, what was he describing as perfectly normal and perfectly well understood in the context of fundraising?
So when he was the Conservative Party's treasurer, he was the subject of a Sunday Times investigation where 2 undercover journalists pretended to be donors and wanted, in summary, to buy access with donations to the then Prime Minister David Cameron, and went to Cruthers directly to set it up. Now, Cruthers went on to sue the paper. He won on a particular point, which was that he didn't try and facilitate an overseas and so unlawful donation. But the case went all the way to the Court of Appeal, which ruled that, that's true. We keep that finding of the High Court. But Cruthers did offer access to government policy making in exchange for donations. And the judges in the appeal court described that as unacceptable, inappropriate and wrong. So very strong. And when we put this to Peter Cruthers, he said, but it's legal. And I thought that was kind of great because the appeal court is basically saying, look, if this is how fundraising works, which is what Lord Cruthers says, then it is unacceptable, inappropriate and wrong.
But it's legal.
But it's legal.
Of course, the House of Lords Appointment Committee advised British Prime Ministers not to put him in the House of Lords, and Boris Johnson elected to completely ignore that advice and put him in the Lords, which perhaps explains the strength of his loyalty to Boris Johnson. He's spitting nails about the way in which Boris Johnson's closest colleagues decided to get rid of him.
That's right. So Cruthers' nomination to the Lords was the first time, incredibly, that the House of Lords Appointments Commission told the Prime Minister, we can't support this person, and Boris Johnson overruled them. Now, we, in the podcast, we kind of use Cruthers to tell a broader story about the House of Lords, and we got access to this one secret report called Project Homer. And we kind of went through the nominations and realized Johnson is really using his power of patronage over the Lords to both reward people who are personally loyal to him, people who kind of, take him on holiday, use their newspapers to support him. And then ones like
Lebedev, Goldsmith.
Yes, Lebedev is an example. Nominees whose names are kind of doing the rounds. Andrew Roberts, for example, the historian.
Dacre.
Paul Dacre.
But also, they're the ones that may be on the next list, and perhaps that explains why the Daily Mail is so furiously trying to undermine the Standards Committee investigation. But the ones that were already in there, dubious appointments, people who are really notable for nothing except their slavish devotion to Boris Johnson, like Daniel Moylan or Daniel Hannan.
Yes, that's right. And then you have Peter Cruthers in the vein of appointments that just offer total unyielding political support. So actually Cruthers, unlike Evgeny Lebedev, for example, has voted in almost every single vote since taking his seat, always in support of the government, except on one occasion. He voted against extending abortion rights in Northern Ireland, as it happens.
You mentioned Project Homer.
Yes.
That is the Linton Crosby master plan to turn the House of Lords into a sort of Boris Johnson fan club.
That's right. So the report is really extraordinary, I think. So Linton Crosby say it was just for internal discussion. But I find that hard to believe because it is very long, 27 pages long. A lot of time has gone into it, a lot of research, interviews, data. And it's very, I guess in a word, cynical in that it not only proposes packing the Lords with Brexit supporting peers, because that's the aim. The aim of the strategy is to pack the Lords with Brexit supporting peers and to support Boris Johnson's bills going through the Lords. But it proposes a number of ways of obscuring this House of Lords packing. So, for example, it suggests including very controversial nominees like Paul Dacre, so that the media completely focuses on that one nominee and loses sight of the fact that he's sending 40 or 30 or whatever people. And then it kind of proposes, unbelievably, incentivizing loyalty, it says, among peers by taking them for lunches and dinners at Chequers.
Well, that's kind of died in the water, hasn't it, now? And finally, I think, because we're going to run out of time, this is, I mean, again, it's perfectly legal, but it's also pretty close to blackmail for Lord Crowley, legal blackmail, to say, if you don't change the rules so that you can never get rid of a Prime Minister in the way that you've got rid of Boris Johnson, then I won't give you any more money, says Peter Cruddas, who's already given the Tories £3 million and was put in the House of Lords despite the House of Lords Appointment Committee telling the Prime Minister that he shouldn't be put in the House of Lords. That's
right. And he really uses that power of wealth to kind of shape the Conservative Party. I mean, he's done it in his role as treasurer when he made personal donations to the party. But he has in effect issued that threat, I suppose you can call it, where he's withholding enormous sums of money unless the party changes its constitution.
But I mean, if you do not change the constitution of the party, I will not give you any money.
That's right. And I mean, for me, it was an eye-opener just how much power a small number of donors have on the party, although the party won't admit to it itself.
Paul, we're out of time. I was with Maria Racer earlier this week. She spoke very warmly of your mum.
That's very kind. I love Maria. I think she's extraordinary.
She is.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you, Paul. Caruana Galizia from Tortoise there with yet another incredible investigation into, I don't know, you'd call it the nuts and bolts or the under the bonnet workings of British government while everybody's tugging their forelocks and doffing their caps and waving their little Boris Johnson flags. You've got a fella here quite open about the fact that he's telling the party of government if they don't rewrite their constitution, he will turn off the money taps. Honestly, it's not even on the list of the worst things that have happened under Boris Johnson's premiership, but I think I'll add it. Putting someone in the Lords... Yeah, we will. We'll put Peter Cruddas on the list. Putting someone in the Lords that the House of Lords Appointment Committee said shouldn't be put in the House of Lords. Need to finish the list. There's a couple more to go on it, and then we'll start looking at what the actual worst thing is. It's 3 minutes after 12. A couple more on the list, and then we'll start going after which one we actually think is the worst of all. And it doesn't have to be obvious, if you like. It could be something from which all else follows, if you follow me. Stuart's in Galicia in northern Spain. Stuart, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good afternoon to you, Mr. O'Brien.
Hello,
yeah, I was going to mention the 40 hospitals, the complete lie about that. And I was going to say that because there's an architect who worked on hospitals in London. I was so angry when he kept going on about 40 new hospitals. But then I moved on from that, and I thought that could be...
I'm putting it on the list. I'm putting it on the list, though.
Thank you. Thank you. Because it's just not doable. But the main thing, and I'm an out-and-out Republican, as I mentioned to your producer.
Right.
When I saw Her Majesty, was it Windsor Chapel, the memorial service?
Yes.
And she was sitting on her own, quite a diminutive figure, all in black, obviously. And there's Johnson in his cohorts going on about lies about not having parties, blah, 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 and wrapping themselves in the Union Jack. I thought, my God, what has happened to that country? What is happening to England, Great Britain?
It's a big...
I've been away 2.5 years, James. And,
that's an interesting 2.5 years, isn't it? You've been out of the game.
Well, I travelled over the morning you spoke to your late friend Lillian.
Oh, did you really?
And I had to pull over because it upset me so much.
Oh,
but in those 2.5 years, I've seen a country change. If you wrote the script, you wouldn't get a film production out of this.
No, you wouldn't.
So that was it. That image of Her Majesty sitting alone in Windsor Chapel, whilst Johnson and all his cohorts are line and line.
And having knees-ups galore.
And what that said to me, she represents the country. She is the country. And basically Johnson, excuse this, is sticking his fingers up to the country and just saying, I can do this because I'm Boris Johnson.
So she is publicly obeying the rules in what must have been the most lonely and painful of ways, while he was riding roughshod over them the minute the door was shut at Downing Street.
Absolutely, and I'll finish on this, James, but when they go, Downing Street's a big place, the way I looked at it, Downing Street was a nuclear submarine. Johnson was the commander. If he'd been any sort of leader, he would have had the nous, the wit, to say, right, you're my sub-lieutenant, you look after this, and I want a feedback every evening. He couldn't be bothered, James. I feel for everyone in England. As I say, I do miss the country, I miss my family, but that image, as much as I'm a Republican, will stay with me forever because, you know, I welled up that day when I saw her sitting on her own. Yeah. And I thought, Johnson, you're not a fit man to be.
Oh, the phone line's gone down, but we got there. You're not a fit man to lace her shoes or be Prime Minister or represent this country on the world stage. There it is. And I think that is... I think that is an emblematic picture, actually, whether or not it counts as something he did, because she was right to observe the rules at the funeral, painful though it was to observe. Almost all of us had similar experiences, albeit not necessarily with our spouses, but the contrast of what was happening behind closed doors at Downing Street, people cleaning up vomit. They had a party that night, remember? And the Queen compelled to sit alone in compliance with COVID restrictions and regulations. I think they offered her a free pass, actually, if my memory serves. And she said, don't be ridiculous. I can't possibly have less to endure than my subjects. Thank you, mate. Sue's in Cheltenham. Sue, what have I missed?
Yeah, I was quite surprised, James. Hello, by the way.
Hello.
I was quite surprised to hear that you hadn't mentioned the Dominic Cummings.
Oh, my days, Barnard Castle. Good God, well, there it is. 2 hours into the programme, and one of the most egregious offences of all has not even got a look in. That just proves how much there is to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, it's a low bar, isn't it? And, you know, as someone whose mother died in a care home during the first lockdown, you know, I've got quite a few issues. But, yeah, for me, that represented a bit of a turning point, I think, in the relationship between authority and the governed.
Yes.
Because I think up until that point, I was just saying to your colleague on the phone, we were all terrified of COVID. I was frightened of getting it, frightened of dying of it. I had a daughter across the world that I thought I might not see again. And I really thought there was a feeling then that he would have to go and that Johnson would come out and say, look, mate, you've got to go. I know that all my friends, even the ones who kind of sympathetic towards the Tories, thought, well, OK, that's going to happen. And we all watched that farcical thing in the Rose Garden thinking, OK, sometime now he's going to say, look, I fall on my sword. Yeah. And I think there was just such disbelief after that.
And among us, that
changed things. Change that power dynamic, and I think now we've got used to all of that lying and that covering up for lies.
And you see the colleagues and indeed the client journalists watching that and thinking.
I mean, where's the fourth estate in this?
I agree. Well, I am doing my best, Sue. Give us a break.
Yeah, okay, but you and Channel 4 on your own, basically, isn't it? No one else.
Plenty of my colleagues here are doing brilliant work as well. And Eddie has done a great. Don't make me make a list now, because then everyone will point out who's not on it.
Okay,
I'll get into trouble. I'll have to find a new chair at the Christmas party. Well, we're watching that in the Rose Garden with a sense of horror, and yet people like Liz Truss are watching it as if it were a tutorial.
Well, yes, because now it's set a precedent, hasn't it?
And everyone thought, God, if I stay loyal to him, he will let me get away with murder.
Literal murder.
Maybe literal murder, but not necessarily literal murder. But you think about what other members of that government have done subsequently. You know, you can be a bully, I'll look after you, but then the Barnard Castle, you can look down the barrel of a camera lens and lie through your teeth, and everyone knows you're lying. All you've done is construct a legally watertight case. They can't prove that you're lying. Anyway, I can't prove what's in your mind. That's it. That's the defence. Oh, yes, I was driving. I was breaking the rules, but I was doing it because, what was it again? I was worried about my eyesight.
His child. I think his
I was
child,
worried about his eyesight.
Oh, that day was his child. Yeah, but the trip to Durham.
The original trip was... God.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
you're
I
right.
think
No, you're right. That,
on
do you
its
know?
own, it's not huge, but to me, that was the kind of pivotal moment. It was a watershed. After that, we got used to the lies, and we took them on, and people accepted them.
And these are the Trumpian tiptoeings, aren't they? Where you sort of expect everyone's going to join me in being outraged by this, and then you look over there, and I don't know, you open up the Mail or the Sun or whatever it was, and you thought, oh my God, they're going along with it. They're actually going along with it, and that must be what America felt like for most of the time that Donald Trump was in the White House. I can't believe it. People I used to work with, people I know, people I still work, they're going along with it. They're going along with it. Because that was huge. Do you know, it's a late entry, but I think that's a contender for the top spot, actually. If you think about what it combines and what it distills and what it conveys, that could well be a contender. John's in Croydon. John, what would you like to say?
Morning. Good afternoon. What I'd like to say is the worst thing he's done is lumbered the whole country with his bloody awful government, if you excuse the word. I mean, you know...
Do you mean the calibre of the cabinet?
Well, they're there because they're loyal to him. Nothing to do with their competence at all. If it was, you wouldn't have Nadine Dorry, you wouldn't have Truss as Foreign Secretary, you wouldn't have half of them. He got rid of a huge number of competent people because they disagree with him, and it's down to him. And, they're there because they're loyal to him, not because of their competence.
I mean, some of these people thrived under Theresa May. I don't know, oddly.
True.
I'm not galloping to his defence, but I don't know that we can lay the full responsibility. I mean, Brexit is the reason why our cabinet is populated by idiots, because you could only be in Theresa May or Boris Johnson's cabinet if you were prepared to publicly claim it was a good idea. And that, I think, automatically removed everybody with IQs in double figures. So I don't know if this is... I mean, the Dorries thing, I can't imagine, but there's talk that Truss might leave her in culture. That's the only response, John, isn't it? I love that. Such a natural, organic response. You've just got to laugh, mate, haven't you?
Yeah. I mean, well, you have, except for the fact that it's making us the laughing stock of the rest of the world.
Well, if they can be bothered to have an opinion at all, obviously the fundamental ridiculousness of what we've done to ourselves is there. You're right. No, well, all right. I mean, I'll work it in with that caveat that Theresa May has already put in people like Gavin Williamson in big jobs, so he doesn't bear full responsibility for that. It goes back to Brexit, which, of course, was also very much his baby. Some of the stuff doesn't make the cut, if you're wondering why, because he wasn't Prime Minister when it happened. So the technology lessons with the woman who trousered tens of thousands of pounds of public money to go on trips with him, that doesn't make the cut. In fact, for that reason, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, making her plight measurably, infinitely worse than it was already, probably doesn't make the cut either, because he was Foreign Secretary. That means the Lebedev stuff makes, but not the actual... Well, no, because he was Prime Minister when he admitted he'd been at the party, so we can have that. We can leave that one in there. And the whole links to both Lebedevs are, at the very least, questionable. It's coming up to 12:15. Let's squeeze in Lewis in Putney, one of my star contributors, so this will be good. What have you got?
Hi, James. Thank you for the introduction.
Don't blow it. Don't blow it, mate. The pressure's on now.
Yeah, I know. So my one is going to be when he referred to the civil service as the deep state in Prime Minister's question.
Played. Very late in the day, wasn't it, as well, in his premiership? But that is adopting the worst of the sort of QAnon, deliberate, vicious, blatant lies designed to denigrate reality, to denigrate.
Well, as we saw in January 6th, how it can effectively, if given enough of a push, it can undermine democracy.
So he's watching January the 6th, he's standing up, he's under pressure in the Prime Minister's questions 18 months later, and he thinks, I'll have a bit of that, I'll blame it on the deep state.
Well, because there are certain people who will love that. They'll eat it up. Because it's to stop Brexit as well, of course.
Yes. It's probably the deep state that's responsible for the festival of Brexit being the mother of all disasters, isn't it? It's the deep state and me and you, Lewis. It's all our fault.
Well, I haven't been.
Well, there you go. You see, you miserable Ramona. Thank you. Yeah, the deep state rhetoric. Just that and the Savile thing, those glimpses at PMQs of just how low he would go. And he would go as low as Trump, I think. I really do. It took me a long time to recognise or admit that. I cling as a patriot to the idea that a British Prime Minister can't be that depraved. But deep state stuff, I mean, that's up there with the paedophile conspiracies in the basement of the pizza restaurant in New York. It's where it comes from. It's where the phrase comes from. It's 12:15. 12:18 is the time. 2 more quick ones, and then we'll. All right, 3 more quick. Well, listen. We can't keep making the list. We've got to start arguing about what's the worst thing on it. So I'll tell you what, I'll try and talk a bit less. I know, it never happens. Anthony's in Blackpool. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Hello. I've been desperate to get on. Let the expletive bodies pile high in the streets.
Yeah.
For me, personally, I didn't lose anybody during COVID. But irrespective of that, I thought it was just invidious and callous. I just thought it was a disgraceful thing to say.
Well, it clearly was. I mean, it objectively
was. And I think,
was.
Sorry, James, I also think it kind of showed his hand. It showed the core of the man.
Yes.
What a disgusting thing to say.
Isn't it? I mean, it's almost beyond belief, even in retrospect, isn't it? Dominic Cummings has confirmed that Johnson had said that he would rather let the bodies pile high than have another lockdown. I don't know what to say, actually. I mean,
It also kind of reflects that he was forever playing towards the ERG group, the ERG right-wing entities, who, of course, were so opposed to lockdown. You've talked about them talking about face masks as being nappies or whatever, and blatantly not wearing them in Parliament.
Just these weirdos. That's all they are, isn't it?
But,
I mean,
James, wasn't that damn disgusting?
Well, I mean, completely and clearly, and yet more evidence or yet more grist to the mill of how people can continue to, people whose bodies he was talking about, potentially, continue to think that he's somehow their man. Let the bodies pile high. We love him. But he was prepared to, it doesn't matter, we love him. You're on the list. And I mean, what's incredible is it's 12:20. We may have alluded to that earlier, but no one's put it on the list yet. So 2.5 hours into making a list of Boris Johnson's greatest hits, and his willingness to see the people he governs die in untold numbers has only just popped up. Go on, sorry.
I could only tune in at 11. So I
wasn't criticising you.
No. I didn't mean it that way. I was very surprised it wasn't already on your list.
No, so am I now. So I can only tune in at 11. Thank you, Anthony. Raising a laugh in the most grim of circumstances. Chris is in Southampton. Chris, what have you got?
Pleasure to speak with you, James.
Likewise, Chris,
following on from the last guy, bodies were piled up.
That's true.
They were in the mortuaries.
Yes.
So they weren't on the streets, but they were hidden in mortuaries. My thing for your list is basically his failure to get rid of Matt Hancock.
Yeah.
A complete incompetent person who Dominic Cummings said should have been fired 15 times.
Yeah, that's
interesting.
His
rewriting of history. Now he's saying that there were no shortage of PPE. I worked in intensive care during the first wave, having come out of retirement.
Wow.
And there was not adequate PPE for everybody all of the time. And he says it's only a localised problem. It wasn't a national problem. It was. It's his incompetence to get rid of somebody who was like a rabbit stuck in headlights whenever he appeared on the television. He didn't know his brief.
And that's been confirmed, as you say, by people who are in the room where it happens. And you mentioned rewriting history. I think I'm going to put big calls right on the list, because the attempt, the absolute gaslighting of the population when it comes to he got all the big calls right is I don't know if he's responsible for that. Has he said it himself? Or is it just what other people say about him? I can't remember.
It's other people say about him, but it's just the incompetence and the bodies were piled up. We didn't have enough space for bodies at one stage, but they were just hidden away.
Matt Hancock, there you go, the final entry on the list. Although,
thanks, James.
No, thank you, Chris, and thank you for your service during the crisis as well. Coming out of retirement to put in a shift in intensive care, it's almost the polar opposite of the Boris Johnson School of Public Service, isn't it? Right, are we ready for this? And so I'll do it in reverse order. Because I will. 22 minutes after 12. So we'll start with leaving Matt Hancock in post. And that ties with Durham. It ties with Barnard Castle, doesn't it? Because he can't get rid of anyone. When you are so sort of corrupted yourself as Prime Minister, you can't get rid of anyone. Because if Boris Johnson were to get rid of anyone, whether it was for lying, like Dominic Cummings, or being useless, like Matt Hancock, everyone would turn around and say, well, how come you're still in your job? You're a massive liar and you're really useless. So I think that's linked. So leaving Matt Hancock there, the let the bodies pile high in the streets rather than have a second lockdown comment. Talk about a window into the soul, or what passes for the soul of the man. The deep state comment in PMQs quite recently, which of course shows that he's willing to deploy the worst of QAnon-style conspiracy theories and deeply damaging rhetoric, the kind of rhetoric that led directly to the January the 6th attack upon the Senate building in Washington. I mean, that's a late entry from Lewis, but it's a big one, isn't it? The calibre of the cabinet that he assembled being deeply damaging to both the national interest and the body politic. The 40 new hospitals lie. The elevation of Peter Cruddas into the House of Lords, despite the House of Lords Appointment Committee advising against it. The cull of all dissenters from the House of Commons. Backbenchers who would have been prepared to speak truth to power about everything from Boris Johnson's fitness to govern right through to the realities of Brexit, all shown the door. The defence of Dominic Cummings after the blatant breach of lockdown rules that they wrote and the epic lies about eyesight and Barnard Castle. The stepping back from the legislative pledge to bring about a ban upon conversion therapy. Wallpapergate, no one's mentioned, but I've added it to the list. The begging, essentially, the desperate sort of scrounging of money to pay for ludicrous decorations at Downing Street and then claiming afterwards that he couldn't remember doing so because he'd lost all his WhatsApp messages. Again, something that Cummings describes as he claims that Johnson was contemplating even more egregious behaviours than the ones that we know about. I'd put the appointment of Dominic Cummings on the list, actually, for what it's worth, lest anyone think I set much store by what he says. But if he was lying, he'd have been sued. The £37 billion on test and trace and Dido Harding's tenure there. Not just Cruddas, but the calibre, the general calibre of people that he's put into the House of Lords. The Zach Goldsmiths, the Daniel Hannans, the Daniel Moylans, the Claire Foxes. Absolutely unbelievably inadequate individuals who have been rewarded not for public service or the national duty, but for blind loyalty to Boris Johnson or providing free holiday homes. The scandal of the care homes at the beginning of coronavirus when infected people were pushed into care homes. That Daily Telegraph article early on, comparing it to a medieval siege when corpses riddled with plague would be launched over the ramparts of a castle in order to kill the people inside. The skipping of 5 Cobra meetings, again at the beginning of coronavirus, when those pictures in Italy were emerging, apocalyptic, almost biblical images emerging in Italy, and Boris Johnson didn't bother going to the first 5 emergency meetings. The description of investigations into historical child sex abuse as spaffing money up the wall. I think that happened in this room. Incredible. The U-turn followed the abysmal refusal to contemplate feeding the hungriest children in the country during school holidays in lockdown. It took Marcus Rashford, a footballer, to somehow inject a little bit of decency into the heart of government. The appointment of David Frost to the House of Lords, but more pertinently to be the negotiator of the so-called oven-ready deal, which they then immediately started complaining about and threatening to break international law in order to wriggle out of the treaty commitments that they'd made, rendering us almost sort of untrustable on the world stage and ridiculous to anybody paying attention. Frost in particular seems emblematic of the Boris Johnson years, Boris Johnson's Brexit Britain, a place in which David Frost, previously known for running the Scotch Whisky Association, a role in which he was adamant leaving the European Union would be an unmitigated disaster, can end up being some sort of king across the water for the most deluded and dismal of Tory supporters. The pledge to be prepared to break international law in a very limited and specific way. Allegedly instructing government departments to help evacuate animals to Afghanistan while human beings remained. The promise that there'd be no border in the Irish Sea. The misleading of the Queen. The proroguing of Parliament, subsequently proven to be unlawful. The parties that were unfolding almost every night, including when Her Majesty was reduced to sitting alone in the Windsor Castle Chapel and they were having a knees up at Downing Street, never mind the ones that he actually attended himself. The attempts to save Owen Paterson after he'd been found to have breached the parliamentary standards. The attempt to rip up the rule book because one of their favourite cronies had been found to have... I nearly said something a little bit rude then. Had been found to have broken the rules. On it goes, putting the son of a KGB spy in the House of Lords. I don't think we've seen the report on that one, have we? Didn't he send it back? Have we seen what the security services had to say about that? And then, of course, revealing as Prime Minister that when he was Foreign Secretary, he'd attended a party at the Palazzo hosted by a man who's currently sanctioned in Canada for being a key member of Vladimir Putin's inner circle. Using a lie put out by far-right social media vampires about Keir Starmer and Jimmy Savile when Keir Starmer was Director of Public Prosecutions. Not just doing it, but doing it in Parliament, in the House of Commons. No depth unplumbed. Tearing up a report into whether or not the Home Secretary Priti Patel was a bully. We know that she was because A, the report said so, and B, they paid £370,000 to the man who she bullied. An act so egregious that the actual advisor on the independent advisor on ministerial standards on ethics resigned in protest. The second one resigned as well. That hasn't even made the list. Oh, boy. And then the shaking of hands with COVID patients, boasting about shaking of hands with COVID patients when his only job was to convey to the population of these islands that we had to be absolutely unprecedentedly careful about human contact in the earliest days of the coronavirus. That's your list. And then you've got the overviews, the big pictures, the step back, the breaking of trust, the corrupting of objective reality, the heartbreaking revelation that this is a country in which the worst kind of politicians can thrive. And that's not over, because I've said it before and I'll say it again, when the rest of us have been reeling with disgust and horror at what this man has done to our democracy, to our country and to our politics, Liz Truss has been taking notes. It's 12:30. Tim Humphrey has your headlines. 12:33 is the time. Right, there was a purpose to that list. I was exhausted by the time I got to I can't do it again. No, I won't. I can't do it again. Honestly, I've told you how exhausting this job. Don't go there again. I can't help myself sometimes. I've told you how exhausting this job is. You didn't listen last time. I'm absolutely knackered now. The reason I read you that list, everything from Owen Paterson to the cull of the dissenters to the elevation of Peter Crudders to the betrayal of care homes, to the absence from Cobra meetings, to the persistent employment of Matt Hancock as Health Secretary, to the let the bodies pile high in the streets, to the misleading of the Queen, to the proliferation of parties, to the bulldozer comments. I want to know which one, honestly, you think is the worst. Out of all of that, what's the worst thing he did? 0345 6060 973. That is some list, and we've almost certainly missed a couple of things off it, if not more. But it's fairly comprehensive. I think we can all agree. What's the worst thing on it for you? Hand on heart. And if you've never rung me before, I'd love to know, actually, the one that's just got you right in the feels. I'll try and pick one. Simon Martz is with us after 12:45 to talk us through latest events in America. But I'll try and come... At the moment, I would struggle. So I'll probably just listen to a few of your suggestions and then nick the best one. Asghar is in Ilford. Asghar, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
I'm not much of a royalist, to be honest with you, but I think the picture of the Queen sitting there on her own, I think that defines what happened in this country, the fact that Bozo and his crew were having the parties, and even on the evening of his funeral, and it was like carrying up the Khyber, really, wasn't it?
I listen, it's an early one, and I'm going to try and rattle through as many suggestions as I possibly can on this, so I won't detain you unduly. But can we really lay the responsibility for this at his feet? It's not something he did knowingly. She was right to obey the rules. The particular parties that were going on that night, I don't think he attended, albeit that they were happening in his house. I think he might have been somewhere else. So although it's the most powerful...
Parties, James.
He what?
He said he knew nothing about the parties or anything happening in his own house.
Yeah, he did. But
it's Parliament.
Yeah, he did, but that's a different offence. It's the picture of the Queen is incredibly powerful, I grant you, but it doesn't quite work as an event. She had to do What?
It's the time of this country was going through.
No, I know, but that's what she did the right thing. No one's disputing that.
Yeah. Okay, let's put it the other way around.
Go on then.
The Duke of Edinburgh passes away. The Queen opens her house, and all dignitaries start swanning into Westminster Abbey. How would that have looked at that particular point? One rule for one and one rule for another?
No, I mean, listen, you're absolutely right to be outraged. I'm not suggesting for a minute that this isn't indefensible conduct, but I don't know that we can lay that juxtaposition of the picture of the Queen and the party that was going on in Downing Street at the time as a single event. So I put parties on the list. The worst thing was the parties and the lies about the parties and the fact that the Queen was sitting alone in Windsor Chapel when another party was unfolding. I think you can have that sort of triple whammy, but I don't think you can just have the Queen being reduced to such circumstances as an action of Boris Johnson's. I hope that makes sense. I think it does. 12:36 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're just trying to work out what the worst thing is. Stephen's in Fairford. Stephen, what do you reckon?
James, I think what he's done with Northern Ireland is probably the most dangerous and terrible thing he's done. It risks peace in that country. All the other things are absolutely disgusting, but I think that is the most dangerous.
Yeah, and for what? For what?
Absolutely.
Just to get his ludicrous so-called oven-ready deal over the line while lying about what it was going to involve and what it was going to do. Yeah, I mean, Northern Ireland
it's
again.
It's the thing that horrifies me most.
Yeah, because that's one of the great known unknowns that he leaves for the rest of the country to wrestle with moving forward, and that is far from over. And that's the threat of violence in Ireland, never mind the threat to our allies in Europe and what breaching the terms of the protocol would mean. Thank you, Stephen. Northern Ireland, it's a contender, isn't it? The parties. Oh, boy. Andrew's in Streatham. Andrew, what do you think?
I think the deep state comment in Parliament was the very worst. He was employing everything that is going wrong in America through having a pipeline into the UK. He knew the game was up for himself, so he's kind of, employing a sort of burnt, scorched earth policy for those that have to pick up the pieces, even though he knew the damage that it could potentially cause.
Do you know, I was minded to refute this one because he's not there anymore, so it doesn't matter. But you've absolutely articulated why it does matter, because even though he couldn't save his own bacon by doing it, his depravity is so complete that he would throw it out there anyway, regardless of the damage that it does to the country and to faith in politics moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely right. I nearly fell off my chair. I mean, I've been watching all the things you've got on your list. I've been appalled by, but that one was just so awful to me.
Yeah, I can see why. I mean, you look at January the 6th, you look at QAnon, you look at the MAGA cult, the delusion, the violence, the horror over there, and Boris Johnson's thinking, I'll have a bit of that. Not only will I have a bit of that, I'll drop it smack in the middle of Parliament.
You got it.
Yeah, it's a contender. It really is. Colette's in Enfield. Colette, what do you think?
Hi, James. Hey, Fantastic programme.
It's been quite good, hasn't it? I do have to agree on this occasion.
Riveting. I haven't done my chores. I haven't done my housework. I've been listening to you.
I'm sorry.
So, for me, it's the Rose Garden.
Yeah.
Because it was the Rose Garden which showed the contempt, the utter contempt that he held you and I.
Yeah.
And we waited for 20 minutes. We had a Downing Street official in the Rose Garden, not an elected politician, telling us this fantastic tale that he tested his eyes with his baby in the back of the car. And it left me, I remember at the time thinking, who is running this government? And for me, it set the scene of what was to come, which was adults coming out to defend the indefensible.
Yeah.
And for me, it set the tone of his entire premiership.
Something broke that day. Something really broke that. Despite our suspicions and our fears and our problems, something broke that day, because it was, we will lie to you, and we know that we're lying. We know that you know that we're lying, but we're going to do it anyway, and we're going to get away with it.
It was the Rose Garden.
Yeah.
It was the Rose Garden.
It sounds like you're playing Cluedo.
No. Because I remember the last event we had in the Rose Garden was Cameron and...
Clegg.
Clegg?
Yeah.
You know, that romance coming out in the Rose Garden, followed up by this.
It is incredible, isn't it? So if this were a game of Cluedo, it would be the advisor with the microphone in the Rose Garden.
Yes.
Guilty. 12:40 is the time. Candy's in Thanet. Candy, what would you like to say?
Hello there.
Hello,
I'd like to mention his total dereliction of his duty towards the NHS during his tenure. I don't know if you remember, back a couple of years ago when everybody at 8 o'clock on a Thursday came out and were clapping the NHS. And what he's done, we sort of expected that we might be rewarded, that we might be valued, because I'm a nurse in the NHS. Oh. And what he proposed after all that was a 1% pay rise, which, when the clapping stopped, the slapping began.
You're a poet, Candy.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I don't want to gloss over it, actually. I want to take a moment to reflect upon that. Because at the time it felt quite special, the clapping. From my end, it did, and from your end, it would have felt even better. But then, actually, following up the gestures with substance was not even on the agenda, was it, for him?
It was. His behaviour is totally abhorrent. He's lied about so many things. We've got new figures out, I think, yesterday or today, which shows how badly the NHS can't recruit. They can't retain staff.
We're going to get straight in on that on Monday, by the way, because I think that whether it's deliberate or not, Priti Patel commissions a report that miraculously delivers exactly the conclusions that Priti Patel would want it to deliver, and Boris Johnson does the same, apparently with some legal advice, and none of us are talking about the NHS. I'll be all over that on Monday, but yes.
Thanks. Well, get some doctors and nurses on, because they will tell you from the grassroots, shop floor workers on the NHS, what it's like and why it just can't continue as it is. We've got cancer patients who can't get treatment, who can't get a diagnosis, and they're dying unnecessarily. And what this man has done to the NHS and to the patients, to the people, to doctors, to nurses, physios, OTs, he's just a spiteful, nasty piece of work.
Next time you come on, Candy, I want you to say what you mean, all right? And not beat around the bush and sit on the fence like this.
I didn't swear, did I?
No, you did very well. I thought you were about to, just for 1 second. I think Keith was worried as well. Thank you. And thank you for everything you do. Oh, man. Rob's in Nebworth. Rob, what do you reckon?
Hello there, James. First-time caller, long-time listener.
Welcome.
So, thank you. Yes, it's connected with... I actually just caught the last 40 minutes. I've been somewhere else, and I couldn't believe you didn't have the cronyism, but I guess it's connected with the Dido Harding 37 billion.
Yeah, also, it's not, I mean, he didn't directly sign these deals himself, whereas he did directly put Dido Harding in charge and give her all that cash.
Yeah, but I think what he did do was he gave the green light for that 25% standard commission. You know, we saw a pandemic, they saw an opportunity, and it really sickens me, the amount of money, our money, that's gone to people who don't deserve it. You know, there was a Tory councillor in Chelmsford, I think it was, who bought himself a new £1.5 million house. There was Michelle Moan, who made, her and her husband made £72 million profit on £48 million worth of PPE that didn't work. We had to pay to get rid of it. I think that's what sticks in my craw, is that money that we're all desperate for now has made these people rich. It's life-changing thing.
They're not even talking about it, and the Daily Mail's having kittens about a few quid being spent on diversity lessons in a hospital. I may need to double-check what you just said about the people that you named. I'm fairly confident I remember the details are the same as you do, but we may just need to cross the T's on that one. Thank you, Rob. Susan's in Letchworth. Susan, what's the worst? The worst of the worst of the worst?
Well, I know that Boris Johnson likes to think of himself as a Churchillian figure, but Stalin once said that a million deaths, it's just a statistic. And, I just think that parallels... I'll let you say it.
Yeah, no, I hear you. The idea that he was prepared to let the bodies pile high in the streets rather than bring in a lockdown that his backers and his closest allies didn't want for spurious and curious reasons.
Yes.
It's going to be hard to beat that, isn't it? Let
utterly,
the bodies...
Yes, utterly ruthless.
The people that he governed, he's talking about. The people that I mean, contempt not just for their interests, but for their actual existence, their survival.
Yes, shocking, yeah.
Thank you, Susan.
All right, okay.
And take care. I don't know whether it's just because It feels like a culmination. It feels a bit like a conclusion. But I do wonder whether that is the worst of all. Let the bodies pile high in the streets. Boris Johnson. It's 12:45. 12:48 is the time we began this morning. It feels like a long time ago. One of my favourite shows in a long time, this. Thank you so much for your help. And glancing at the screen now, we could continue probably right through until Boris Johnson actually leaves Downing Street for the final time, which I think is scheduled to happen on Monday. But we began by finally acknowledging the parallels between Britain and America, the fact that Boris Johnson's audacity in doing some sort of victory lap when it's taken us 3 hours to make a list of all the appalling things that he's inflicted on this country, and the claim that he's done a good job is up there with the big lie that Donald Trump continues to perpetuate, that he actually won the last election. But events in America have been particularly fascinating over the course of the last week, and whenever that happens, we call upon the sage that is Simon Marks, and we ask a variation on the question that we've been asking almost since he became president, which is, I'm talking about Donald Trump becoming president, not Simon Marks, although I'm sure he'd have done a better job, which is this the straw that will break the camel's back, Simon? And tell us, first of all, what the straw is with regard to the secret documents, the Mar-a-Lago raid, and the incredible contortions that Trump has undertaken in order to evade reality this time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not evident that it is necessarily the straw that will break the camel's back, but it certainly is the straw that could lead to Donald Trump and others in his inner circle facing obstruction of justice charges. We knew, James, earlier in the summer that Donald Trump had taken a whole pile of records that actually belong to the American people and to the United States government to Mar-a-Lago. Just to be clear, all the documents that any American president touches during the time of his presidency are not his personal property. They are the property of the country, and they are due to be handed over to the National Records Administration, which is part of the National Archives, at the end of every presidency. Donald Trump, of course, being unusual in every regard, decided not to do that and took about 15 boxes of documents to Mar-a-Lago. Now, much earlier in the year, we knew that those boxes had found their way to Mar-a-Lago. We knew that the National Archives were sending people down there to pick them up, and we knew that the Trump team was handing them over. What we did not know was that that was not the entirety of the trove of documents, many of them containing top secret, absolutely super classified markings and status that Donald Trump had taken with him. And so behind the scenes, there was this ongoing tussle between Donald Trump and his people down in Florida and the National Archives up here in Washington over the National Archives' suspicion that other papers were still at Mar-a-Lago. The failure of the Trump people to cooperate fully with that investigation by the National Archives is what led to that very dramatic, unprecedented FBI raid on the former president's home, which resulted, of course, most recently in the publication of that photograph, literally showing an array of documents on the president's, not particularly attractive, it has to be said, carpet of his office in Mar-a-Lago. I think I might have picked a slightly different colour, but there it is. Now, Trump, of course, insists that that's not how he was keeping the records. This is an attempt by the FBI to smear him and to indicate that these records were all mishandled by him. But the bottom line is they took away another 300 pages of documents, many of which it is absolutely clear he should not have had and were not being security stored in the manner in which the National Archives had demanded. That's why we're seeing all of these legal filings from the Department of Justice in the back and forth tennis match with Donald Trump and his lawyers over this that indicate very clearly that the Department of Justice is mounting a case to bring obstruction of justice charges against someone in Trump world, possibly the former president himself, possibly also his lawyers. And he's got a real problem because he spent the last month trying to find lawyers willing to represent him, which is hard because he has such a long track record of refusing to pay lawyers and because, frankly, his legal argument is pretty thin. Yeah. But then having found lawyers to represent him, now those lawyers could find themselves being accused of having misled investigators when they told investigators, we haven't got any of these documents. He's turned them all over.
Good grief. What is his defence? Well, I mean, I used the word contortions when I was... You're chuckling, but we need some words.
Well, I mean, there isn't a defence. I mean, there really isn't a cogent defence. I mean, on the one hand, there have been supporters of Donald Trump who have argued that this is all an FBI plant operation. Conspiracy theories that suggest the FBI are simply trying to take him down on the brink of him seeming to be ready to announce that he's running again for the presidency in 2024. On the other hand, Donald Trump has now indicated that all of these documents were declassified. They were declassified by him. And don't worry about those classification markings that they all contain on the cover sheets. It's just they still had the cover sheets on them, but he declassified them before he left office. Now, there's no evidence to support the view that he went through any kind of formal declassification process. It has to be said that there is controversy and dispute over precisely how a president can declassify documents. Remember, Donald Trump's got form in this regard. Remember that meeting that he had with Israeli officials in which he inadvertently at one point during his presidency provided them with classified information that then led to H.R. McMaster racing out onto the White House lawn and assuring everybody that he was in the room and it never happened. Then the White House said actually it did happen, but it was okay because by disclosing this intelligence, I think it was actually intelligence about Israel that he disclosed to Russian officials, but by disclosing this intelligence, that was an act of declassification. Well, that's not exactly how the process is supposed to work, and this argument that all of these documents are somehow governed by a blanket act of declassification still doesn't answer the central question, which is, why has he got them? Why does he even want them?
Do you want to have a go at answering that?
Well, I mean, there are all sorts of theories about that. I mean...
Well, it's Donald Trump we're talking about, so you have to think either leverage of some kind or, I mean, information that other people might be prepared to pay for. I mean, you can go anywhere with this, couldn't you?
Well, let's start out by being fair to Donald Trump. At the end of any presidency, it is usual for presidents to want to consult some of their papers as they start preparing to build their presidential library and write their presidential memoirs.
The first time for everything, I suppose.
I'm not entirely convinced you or I are going to live long enough to read Donald Trump's presidential memoirs, but who knows? We might make it that far.
The greatest memoirs, the best.
I mean, so you could argue that he wanted to have access to some of these papers to refresh his memory. You could also argue, as some Trump insiders do, that when it comes to things like the quote-unquote love letters that he exchanged with Kim Jong-un of North Korea, that those are personal in nature. Those documents are personal in nature. But then you also have to say, well, hang on a second, this is a president who we know flushed presidential papers down the White House lav while he was in office, which is in and of itself very curious and still unexplained. And what exactly is he doing with documents that reportedly include, and we know there is a document in there that's all about the French president Emmanuel Macron, friend or foe, but what's he doing with documents that reportedly have all sorts of details about Emmanuel Macron's private life contained
and
within them?
Talking about it.
You know, obviously documents like that have potential value to the United States, which is why they're all marked top secret. And also, some of these documents may have contained information about human espionage sources that the United States has in various unsavory parts of the world. And by storing these documents, the president now acknowledges, in cartons in his own office at Mar-a-Lago, a room where his own lawyers say guests were coming and going all the time. I mean, you're putting these documents at substantial risk of either leaking or being used for their value in some fashion by the former president and people working at Mar-a-Lago.
Indeed. We've only got a minute left, but a quick word on what Joe Biden is up to. He's had some rather impressive results lately.
Well, he's had a turnaround, and that's why we saw this speech last night in Philadelphia, this dark warning that there's a continued battle for the soul of America and that Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent a threat to democracy. Pretty difficult to go around the world telling world leaders, including perhaps Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak in the next few weeks, that America is back, when you're also arguing that America is on the brink of the ultimate battle to protect American democracy. But he's definitely feeling more confident. I mean, a month ago, his approval ratings were down in the low 30s. They're now back in the mid 40s. He's managed to pluck victory out of the jaws of defeat with regards to a whole slew of key planks of his domestic policy proposals. That's potentially problematic for Democrats who were kind of hoping that Joe Biden wouldn't run for re-election, because it sort of strengthens Biden's position as we head into the midterm elections. And Democrats are daring to dream that while the midterm election cycle isn't going to be great for them, they might not suffer the total drubbing in November that just a few weeks ago seemed inevitable.
Look at that. Bang on time as well. Simon Marks, a pleasure and a privilege to talk to you as always. That's it from me for another week. I do hope you have a splendid weekend. We'll do it all again on Monday morning from 10. Up next, it's Sangeeta Maiska. 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 It's Sangeeta.
sương đêm mộng trắng mùa hoa tuyết nở giữa sao